What if I told you that buried beneath layers of sand, stone, and time are machines, not myths, not metaphors, but actual machines, gears, cogs, copper, precision parts, created by hands we can't trace in times that should have never had the tools to build them. Now pause for a second. We think of history as a straight line. First came the wheel, then came fire, then the plow, then slowly, painfully, humanity stumbled its way toward light bulbs, engines, rockets, and artificial intelligence. But what if that's all wrong? What if someone, some civilization, long before us, jumped ahead? What if they cracked secrets we're only just beginning to rediscover? Secrets about energy, flight, sound, and even the stars. This isn't a science fiction story. These are real discoveries that archaeologists, engineers, and even skeptics can't explain. Take the Antikythera Mechanism. Found in a sunken Greek shipwreck, it's made of dozens of bronze gears, so finely tuned it could track the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Scientists call it the world's first computer, but it's over 2,000 years old, at a time when people supposedly barely understood math. How? Who had the knowledge to build something that precise? And why was it hidden under the sea? But that's just the beginning. There's the Baghdad battery, a clay jar with metal rods that can produce electricity. It was made centuries before batteries were invented. So what was it used for? Lighting? Electroplating? Or something far stranger? And that's not even getting into the ancient texts. Scrolls from India, thousands of years old, that describe flying machines, called vimanas, with astonishing detail. Materials, power sources, battle capabilities. This isn't vague poetry. This reads like a manual. So we have machines that shouldn't exist, technology out of time, and yet they're here, buried in ruins, locked in temples, hidden in myths. And the deeper you look, the more disturbing it gets. Some of these machines aren't just advanced, they're dangerous. Take the Ark of the Covenant, for example. We've all heard of it, this golden chest that carried divine power. But the descriptions say anyone who touched it died instantly. Even priests. It had to be carried with poles. It was stored behind thick curtains, inside stone rooms. Does that sound like a religious object? Or something radioactive? Something unstable? It's as if the ancients weren't worshiping these objects. They were afraid of them. Now here's the real question no one wants to ask. Where did this knowledge come from? Was it passed down from an earlier, lost civilization? One that collapsed long before our version of history began? One wiped out by war, disaster, or time? Or did someone give it to us? All across the world we find the same story. Visitors from the stars, gods who descended with fire and light, who taught humanity agriculture, writing, architecture, and left just as quickly. Every culture, every continent, always the same pattern. But why would this knowledge be hidden? Why aren't we taught about these machines in school? Why are they buried in the back corners of museums or dismissed as coincidences? Because if we accept that ancient machines existed, we have to question everything, our history, our science, even our place in the universe. And maybe that's what scares them the most. In this video, we're diving into the forbidden tech of the gods, the full story of ancient machines that were never supposed to be found. From the precision of forgotten tools to the mysteries of lost energy, flying vehicles, and sacred relics that act more like weapons than wonders. Because once you see the evidence, once you feel how wrong our timeline really is, you'll never look at history the same way again. Let's begin. Let's start with a puzzle. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of Greece stumbled upon something buried in the wreck of a Roman ship. Among broken pottery and corroded statues was a lump of bronze, crusted over by centuries underwater. At first, it didn't look like much, but when scientists finally cleaned it and x-rayed it, what they found changed everything. Inside that lump were gears, dozens of them, teeth so finely carved, so perfectly aligned, it rivaled 18th century clockwork. This was the Antikythera Mechanism, a device over 2,000 years old that could predict lunar eclipses, track planetary movements, and even simulate the timing of ancient Olympic Games. Let that sink in. This thing existed before the invention of the mechanical clock, before telescopes, before modern mathematics. And yet it functions like a complex astronomical computer. Who built it? How did they know how? Even today, engineers struggle to fully replicate it. And here's the real question. If one machine like this survived, how many others didn't? Because the Antikythera mechanism isn't just a clever invention. It's a crack in the official story, a glimpse into a world that's been deliberately forgotten. It tells us one thing loud and clear. We are missing something big, and the mechanism is just the beginning. In ancient Iraq, archaeologists uncovered a strange artifact, now known as the Baghdad Battery. It's a small clay jar, about the size of your hand. Inside was a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with vinegar or lemon juice, it produces a weak electrical charge. Sound familiar? It's a battery, at least in function, and it's over 2,000 years old. No one's entirely sure what it was used for. Some say it was for electroplating gold onto silver. Others believe it was used in healing or even religious rituals involving light. But again, the timeline doesn't fit. How did people who supposedly didn't understand electricity build a working battery? And why were these devices never written about in historical texts? Were they too sacred, too secret, or too dangerous? Here's what you need to understand. These machines, the Antikythera Mechanism, the Baghdad Battery, and others like them, are not isolated anomalies. They form a pattern, a blueprint, a trace of something that once was, something deliberately erased from history. All across the world, we find similar clues. In Egypt, massive stone blocks, cut with laser-like precision, fit together so tightly, not even a razor blade can slip between them. In South America, ancient temples aligned perfectly with the stars and built with techniques we still can't replicate. In India, texts from thousands of years ago describe Vimanas, flying chariots powered by engines fueled with mercury. And they're not written like myths. They read like technical manuals. It's as if ancient people weren't just builders or dreamers. They were engineers, astronomers, scientists, people who understood things. We've only just begun to relearn. But here's where it gets even stranger. Many of these machines were hidden, buried, smashed, forgotten. It's almost as if someone didn't want us to find them. And maybe that's because they weren't meant for us. Think about it. Why would a device as advanced as the Antikythera mechanism be on a ship? Why was it the only one of its kind ever discovered? Where are the instruction manuals, the workshops, the inventors? Maybe that ship was carrying it to safety, or maybe to its grave. And what about the Baghdad Battery? Why would something that could generate electricity be buried in a small clay pot and hidden in an ancient tomb? There's only one answer that makes sense. These machines came from a time before memory, a time before recorded history, before the rise of our current civilizations, a time when a different kind of knowledge ruled the earth. Some call it Atlantis. Some call it pre-Diluvian civilization. Some say it came from the stars. But no matter the name, the evidence points to the same conclusion. There was an earlier chapter in the human story, and someone or something went to great lengths to tear it out of the book. And here's what's most terrifying. Every time one of these machines is found, it doesn't just break the rules of history, it challenges who we are. Because if ancient people had access to high technology, then we're not the most advanced generation to ever walk this earth. We're just the latest. And maybe we're walking in the footsteps of giants, or in the ruins of something much bigger, much older, and much more powerful. So the next time you walk through a museum or flip through a dusty history book, ask yourself, what's missing? Not what they tell you, but what they're not saying. What's been left out, locked away, labeled myth or coincidence? What's been forgotten or made to be forgotten? Because machines like the Antikythera mechanism weren't just tools. They were messages, warnings maybe, blueprints possibly, but they were never meant to be found again. Yet somehow, we did. And the moment we found them, the clock started ticking. Up next, We explore the forbidden blueprints, ancient texts and carvings that reveal a whole system of advanced technology, and hint at a truth too big to hide. Because if machines like these existed, there must have been a power source, a network, a purpose. Let's go deeper. Let's ask the one question that everyone else avoids. If these ancient machines really existed, what powered them? Because gears alone can't move the stars. Batteries don't fuel flying chariots. And stone temples don't glow in the dark unless they were connected to something. Something big. Something we're not supposed to know about. You see, ancient tech isn't just about the machines. It's about the network behind them. A forgotten system of energy, spread across the earth like a web, invisible today, but still humming underneath our feet. Let's go back, way back, to the temples, the pyramids, the stone cities. Most people see them as monuments. But what if they weren't just for worship? What if they were power plants? Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. For centuries, it was considered just a tomb until researchers started asking questions. There's no writing inside. No mummies were found. And the internal chambers? They're strangely precise, perfectly aligned to magnetic north, built with materials that conduct electricity, like granite, quartz, and limestone. Even stranger, the pyramid's base sits on top of underground water channels, a natural conductor of electricity. Now ask yourself, why would a so-called tomb need that? Some believe the Great Pyramid was a massive energy generator, using the Earth's natural vibrations and water pressure to produce something called piezoelectric energy, a form of electricity created through pressure on stone. In other words, the pyramid didn't just sit there, it worked, it did something, and maybe it powered something, but it doesn't stop there. Across the world, we find structures that seem to be built in the same blueprint. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor Wat are aligned with astronomical precision and sit atop underground water reservoirs. In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun has layers of mica, a rare mineral used in electronics, built deep into its structure. In India, ancient temples have towering spires and magnetic elements, aligned with stars and energy points on the Earth. This isn't random, it's not coincidence. It looks like a global energy grid, a network of sacred sites, all linked through geometry, magnetism, and vibration, built not just to honor the gods, but to channel power, literal energy. And it gets even weirder. There's a word that pops up across many ancient civilizations: prana in Sanskrit, chi in Chinese, ka in Egyptian. They all describe the same thing: a universal life force, an invisible energy that moves through everything. The ancients didn't just believe in this energy, they used it. According to lost texts, stone monoliths like Stonehenge weren't just calendars, they were receivers, built on ley lines, natural veins of energy running beneath the earth. And the people who built them? They knew how to tap into it. They could pull power from the sky, the ground, and the stars. This wasn't magic, it was science, just not the kind we're taught. But maybe the most mind-blowing clue of all comes from sound. That's right, frequency. Ancient structures often have acoustic properties. Rooms that vibrate at perfect resonance, chambers that amplify sound, stones that seem to hum at certain tones. Why? Because sound is energy, and in the right conditions, it can move objects, levitate them, even cut through stone. That's not theory, it's physics. In fact, Tibetan monks still use sound to move heavy stones in rituals, and modern researchers have replicated it in labs. So what if the ancients used sound as a tool, as a way to move massive blocks or activate machines? What if ancient temples were not just spiritual centers, but frequency hubs, places where energy could be gathered, amplified, and directed? Maybe those chants and rituals weren't just ceremonies. Maybe they were commands, instructions, programming, like code. Now let's go back to the machines. The Antikythera Mechanism, the Baghdad battery, the myths of Vimanas, and flying shields. All of them imply motion, light, power, but power from where? The clues point to a hidden infrastructure, a global web of sacred geometry, magnetism, water, sound, and star alignment. Not created by accident, but by design. And here's where it all clicks together. These machines, these temples, these frequencies, they weren't separate technologies. They were pieces of the same system. What if I told you now that thousands of years ago, people in ancient India were writing about flying machines? Not just legends or myths, but technical descriptions, diagrams, blueprints, lists of parts and how to use them. They're called vimanas. And what's shocking is how detailed the descriptions are. These weren't just poetic visions of gods flying through the skies. These were machines, vehicles, crafts that moved through the air, and even space. They were powered by engines, controlled by pilots. Some moved silently, some made thunder, and all of them were written down in Sanskrit, centuries before airplanes were ever invented. The first time you hear it, it sounds like fantasy. But let's look deeper, because this might be the missing link between ancient machines and ancient energy. The word vimana first appears in the Rig Veda, one of the oldest texts known to mankind. In those verses, it refers to a flying chariot used by the gods. But as time went on, the word evolved. In the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and other epic texts, vimanas became more than just chariots. They had shapes, like discs, spheres, or pyramids. They could rise vertically, hover, turn in any direction, and travel great distances, across countries or even planets. One vimana, called the Pushpaka, is described as bright as the sun, able to hold many passengers, and capable of changing its size. That's not mythology, that's aeronautics. And it gets stranger. There's an old Sanskrit manuscript called the Vaimanika Shastra. It was supposedly dictated in the early 20th century by a mystic in a deep trance, who claimed to be channeling ancient knowledge. The text explains exactly how vimanas worked. It describes engines that use mercury and centrifugal force, materials that resist heat, controls that allow movement in all directions, even anti-detection systems that could make the craft invisible or silent. Now ask yourself, how would someone in ancient or even medieval India know that mercury spins when heated, creating magnetic fields, or that sound and vibration can affect lift? We barely understood this in modern science until a few decades ago, and yet these ideas were already there, written in ancient script. Could this be a coincidence, or are we looking at survivors of a forgotten science? Some engineers didn't dismiss it. In fact, in 1974, a team of Indian scientists from the Indian Institute of Science reviewed the Vaimanika Shastra. Their conclusion? They were amazed at the technical imagination, but said it didn't match modern aviation as we know it. But that's just the point, isn't it? Maybe this wasn't our kind of aviation. Maybe this was something else, a different science, a lost one that used energy from the earth, from sound, from vibrations, instead of fuel and turbines. Remember the previous section? We explored how temples and pyramids could have been power generators, using sound, water, and stone to create energy. What if vimanas were powered by that same network? What if they charged at sacred sites, lifted off using frequency, and flew on lines of energy across the sky? It's not just India. In ancient Egypt, texts speak of flying discs of the gods. In Sumerian carvings, the gods descend from the heavens in mechanical crafts. In pre-Columbian South America, gold figurines shaped like jet planes were found, ones that were later recreated and proven to fly. And yet in India, the memory of vimanas never faded. Even today, the word vimana means aircraft in many Indian languages. Temples are still built with vimana towers reaching to the heavens. It's as if the memory of flight was never truly lost, only buried. But here's the deeper question. Were these just vehicles, or were they symbols of something bigger? Some researchers believe vimanas represent a state of consciousness, a spiritual technology, that flying wasn't just about movement through space, but through dimensions. Could the ancient texts be describing both? Real machines, and a deeper understanding of how to transcend time and space? Because in the Vedas, the pilots of vimanas weren't just kings or warriors, they were sages, people trained in energy, sound, and inner awareness. This wasn't just technology, It was a relationship between the human mind and the machine, something we're only beginning to explore today with brain-machine interfaces, quantum navigation, and vibrational science. Maybe Vimanas weren't built with nuts and bolts alone. Maybe they were activated by consciousness, and that changes everything. So let's connect the dots. We've seen ancient machines like the Antikythera Mechanism. We've explored how forgotten energy systems might still be pulsing under ancient temples. And now we uncover flying vehicles described in ancient Sanskrit, powered by strange forces, piloted by trained minds, and hidden in the language of myth. None of these stand alone. They form a pattern, a forgotten chapter in human history, where science, spirit, and sound were one, where machines weren't just tools, but extensions of human potential. And if that's true, then everything we think we know about history, about what's possible, might be wrong. Coming up next, we look for the blueprints, the carvings, codes, and diagrams left behind. Because if Vimanas were real, someone must have built them, and somewhere those plans still exist. Let's go decode the next layer of the mystery. Imagine a golden box, not large, but glowing with power. In a box that could kill with a touch, a box that made people fall on their faces in fear, a box said to hold the voice of God himself. You've heard of it before. It's the Ark of the Covenant. But what if this wasn't just a religious symbol? What if it was something else entirely? Not holy magic, but lost technology, not a relic, but a machine. Let's look at what the ancient texts actually say. The Ark of the Covenant was built at the command of God, given to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold, inside and out. On top of it were two golden cherubim, facing each other. It had rings and poles so no one would ever touch it directly. And inside, the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, and, some say, a golden jar of manna in Aaron's rod that budded. But here's where it gets strange. Everywhere the ark went, unexplainable things happened. When the Israelites carried it around the city of Jericho, the walls collapsed. When someone touched it by accident, just to stop it from falling, he dropped dead. When enemies captured it, they broke out in tumors and plagues. The ark wasn't just a box, it was dangerous, it was electrified. Now pause for a moment. Gold-covered wood, metal rings, no direct contact, glowing presence, lethal discharge. That's not just a religious item. That sounds like a kind of capacitor, a device that stores and discharges energy. Could the ark have been generating electricity, or more specifically, harnessing some form of static or atmospheric energy? Modern capacitors are made using layers of conductor and insulator. Gold is one of the best conductors on Earth, and the ark? Covered in it, both inside and out. Now think of this. What if the cherubim on top were like electrodes? If the ark was placed on certain ground, like high-energy stone, or near certain materials, could it have charged itself? And what if the energy wasn't just electrical, but spiritual? Because remember what we said in the earlier sections? Ancient temples weren't just places of worship, they were machines. They were built with sacred geometry, with acoustic designs, with underground water channels. They channeled energy from the earth, from the air, from the stars. So what if the ark wasn't just a machine on its own? What if it was part of a system? Imagine the ark being taken into a temple built to amplify its energy. Imagine priests trained to stand around it, chanting in perfect tones, unlocking its hidden power. Not just religion, resonance, a lost science of sound and spirit, and then it disappeared, gone from history. Some say it was hidden before the Babylonian conquest. Some say it was taken to Ethiopia, where it's still guarded in silence. Others believe it was taken into the heavens by those who gave it to us in the first place. But ask yourself, why would something so important, so sacred, just vanish? Unless someone didn't want us to find it, unless the ark was more than a box, unless it was a bridge between human and divine, between man and machine. This leads us right into our next mystery: suppression, secrecy, and the real gatekeepers. Because throughout history, every time something like this shows up, something that doesn't fit the official timeline, it disappears. Or worse, it's hidden. Ancient machines, forbidden technologies, lost sciences. They're either called myths or are locked away in vaults where no one's allowed to look. Ask yourself, who decides what we're allowed to know? Who controls the narrative of history? And more importantly, why? Because if the Ark was real, if Vimanas flew through the sky, if pyramids channeled energy, then history as we know it is a lie, and we barely scratch the surface. Why have you never heard of the Baghdad battery in school, or the Antikythera Mechanism, or the legends of flying machines in ancient India? Why are these things always labeled as myths, misunderstood, or worse, just coincidences? Why aren't we allowed to question? Who decides what parts of our past are real, and who benefits when the truth stays hidden? Let's look at the pattern. It's always the same. Something ancient is discovered. It doesn't fit the timeline. It's too advanced, too precise, too impossible. First, they discredit it. They call it a ritual object, a religious item, a symbolic artifact. Then it quietly disappears, locked away in a museum basement, mislabeled and never spoken of again, or worse, destroyed, and the world moves on, as if nothing ever happened. This is the cycle. Discover, discredit, disappear. Think about it. We found ancient skulls with surgical holes that show signs of healing. We found 2,000-year-old batteries in Iraq. We found gears, lenses, and computers from before Christ. We found maps that show Antarctica before it was covered in ice. These aren't guesses. They're real, but they don't fit the story we've been told. So instead of rewriting the story, they just bury the page. But ask yourself, who is doing the burying and why? Some say it's academics protecting their careers. Some say it's governments hiding technology. Others believe it's something far older, a network, a brotherhood that's been guarding ancient secrets for thousands of years. Call them the gatekeepers. Not in the movies. In real life, they sit at the top of institutions, they run the archives, they fund the research, they decide what's real and what's not. And above all, they fear one thing, a world where you know the truth. Because here's the dangerous part. If you knew the truth, that ancient people had machines more advanced than we do now, that our ancestors weren't primitive, but powerful, that knowledge from the gods was real and technological, then the entire structure of power collapses. Religions would be questioned, history books would burn, control would break, and the people who sit in the shadows today would have nothing left to hide behind. Do you remember the Ark of the Covenant? It wasn't just a golden chest. It killed people who touched it. It brought walls down with sound. It may have been a capacitor, a power source, technology disguised as faith. And where is it now? Gone, hidden, protected, just like the machines found in caves, just like the flying texts of the Vedas, just like the pyramids that nobody understands. These aren't isolated mysteries. They're part of the same story, a story that someone doesn't want you to finish reading. Let me tell you something you already feel. You've always sensed there was more to this world. You felt it in the ancient temples. You've seen it in the stars. You've heard it in stories you couldn't explain. That's not your imagination. That's memory. The world you were born into has been edited. Your history has been redacted. And the real truth, the full truth, is still out there. Under the sand, under the ocean, inside mountains and vaults and museums. So what happens now? Do we wait for permission to know? Or do we start asking the questions they're afraid of? Because once you realize there's a pattern, once you see how deep the silence goes, you understand. This isn't about curiosity anymore. This is about control. And knowledge is the only key. Next, we're going to look at the machines that were never supposed to survive. The ones too advanced, too strange, too perfect to belong in the ancient world. And yet they do. These are the machines of the gods. But maybe they weren't gods at all. Maybe they were just people. People who remembered something we forgot and left behind the tools to help us remember too. What if we're not the peak of human history? What if we're just a second chapter in a book that started long before we arrived? And what if the first chapter was erased on purpose? Every once in a while, the past whispers, through forbidden artifacts, through strange ancient texts, through ruins we can't explain. It's not just mystery, it's memory. Something older than we were taught, something they don't want us to remember. The story you've been told is simple. We started as cavemen, learned to farm, built pyramids, then slowly became modern. But that's just a story, and stories can be edited. Now ask yourself, why do ancient texts speak of great machines, flying cities, and weapons of the gods? Why do myths from opposite sides of the world describe a great flood, a fall of civilizations, and survivors who carried knowledge? Why do we find gears, batteries, and melted glass in places where no such thing should exist? Because maybe this isn't the first time humans rose up. Maybe this isn't our beginning. Maybe it's our return. You see, the more we dig, literally and metaphorically, the more it looks like humanity has done this before, that we've reached high levels of technology before, that we've built machines, traveled far, mastered energy, and then it all vanished, lost to time, buried beneath oceans and deserts, turned to myth. And in that silence, someone rewrote the story. Someone replaced memory with mythology, knowledge with belief, and we forgot, but not completely, because the evidence keeps breaking through. Take the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, thousands of years old, people frozen in time, streets with melted stone and radiation levels off the charts. It sounds like science fiction until you realize it's real. Or look at the descriptions in the Mahabharata. Flying crafts, weapons brighter than 1,000 suns, cities floating in the sky. Are these metaphors or are they memories? What if Atlantis wasn't just a myth? What if it was one of many lost civilizations? Advanced, powerful, destroyed. And what if every few thousand years we reset? Something wipes the slate clean, war, flood, fire, or something we still don't understand, and only fragments survive. A gear here, a scroll there, a whisper in stone. It's like waking up with amnesia, holding a key you don't remember using, and slowly, painfully, rediscovering who you used to be. This idea, it changes everything. If ancient civilizations had technology, knowledge, power, then everything we believe gets flipped upside down. History isn't linear, it's cyclical. Religion isn't just faith, it might be memory. And our future? It's not something new. It's something we've already done, and maybe something we failed at. But here's the part that hits hardest. If this truth came out fully openly, what would it do? To science, to religion, to governments, to the stories that give people identity. It would collapse them. That's why the truth is still being buried. Not because it's impossible, but because it's inconvenient. It forces us to question, to wake up, to remember. And some people, some forces, don't want that. But the cracks are showing. Every time someone uncovers a tool that shouldn't exist, every time an ancient text aligns with modern physics, every time a child asks, "Why does this feel familiar?" the illusion breaks. And that's why you're here. Because part of you already knows. Part of you has always felt the lie. And now you're ready to see what's behind the curtain. This isn't about ancient machines anymore. It's about ancient memory. It's about the truth they're still trying to bury. And the deeper you look, the more you'll see, it's not gone. It's just waiting to be remembered. If this story made your heart race, if something deep inside whispered, "This is the truth they never wanted you to find," then don't let it stop here. Because this isn't just about ancient machines. It's about everything they buried with them. The wisdom, the warnings, and the power. You've just scratched the surface, and there's an entire hidden world still waiting to be uncovered. What if the myths were real? What if the stories of gods and sky chariots and forgotten science were memories of something humanity once knew? This channel is more than just a place to watch strange videos. It's a map, a trail of clues, And each video is another piece of the puzzle. So if this made you question what you've always believed, hit that like button so the algorithm doesn't bury it. Subscribe because more is coming and you won't want to miss it. Every week we go deeper, more lost texts, more forbidden history, more truths that were never supposed to survive, but they did, and you found them. So stay curious, stay questioning, and stay close, because you're not just watching history, you're remembering it.